Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Volpe Bazzo Report. I'm your co-host, Dominic Volpe. With me tonight, once again, Andy Bazzo, my co-host. And our special guest is Mike Morey. He's the former press secretary for Senator Chuck Schumer and also vice president of the Democratic consulting firm SKD Knickerbocker. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks,
Yeah,
guys.
Mike,
Thanks.
I
Good to be
assume,
here.
like Darren Rigger, you're going to be our regular Democrat consultant, being that you had your sweep of the...
I'd love to come by. So
Now, I want to get something off the record right now, because the last two shows you were busy, and we had you drinking pina coladas down in Florida. So you're back with us now?
I'm back with you. We're ready to go.
You got back just in time for the election results.
That's right. That's
now, we are taping the day after the election. This is November 7th. And what happened, totally, I'm eating humble pie. My mother even came down. She's in the studio to watch me eat humble pie because I got my clock cleaned in the predictions. And I would say that a lot had to do with a term called the ground game. And Mike Morey, who in Peekskill, I think, developed a ground game against all odds in the beginning when Drew Claxton first got elected to the council, knows what a ground game is, and I'm going to have Mike explain to you what the term ground game and what it entails.
Sure, thanks.
Please, Mike.
My pleasure. No, it was a great night.
I knew you'd like that.
Yeah, it was a great night.
Surprised you don't have a hangover.
Well, look. If you look at what happened nationally, and even you look at what happened in New York State, all the indicators would suggest that Romney should have had a better night than he did, and Republicans across the board in New York.
That's why I
should have had a
said
better
ground
run.
game had to be the. So what is a ground
So-
game?
so-
and
so
what did it entail in these elections?
Sure. So where was the difference made? One, I think that first, before you can even get to the ground game, the notion that Republicans should have done better on the economy, we should talk about that a little bit. Because I think that there is some that notion may not have been completely accurate. But a ground game is the organization, the machine, so to speak, that you put together in order to basically pull out voters who will be sympathetic to your cause, to your candidate. What Democrats had showed, and what the president's campaign in particular showed to the expert level, was how to do that.
One second. All politics is local. So here like it says, you were good at this locally. What did they do here locally?
Okay, so a good example is the Sean Patrick Maloney campaign against Nan Hayworth. Nan Hayworth is a first-term incumbent. She led in the polling consistently, both in the public polling and in the internals for both campaigns.
Favorable rating.
She had an overall favorable rating according to Siena, and that district also showed a slight advantage for Romney. Yet Sean Patrick Maloney has won the race by margins that are higher than John Hall did in 2006. How did he do that? Well, Sean Patrick Maloney had a pretty impressive ground operation, a get-out-the-vote operation, which entails identifying where your target voters are, what communities, what blocks, what houses, how many people.
That deep, huh?
Very deep. How many people in that house will vote for you? What's the likelihood that they'll actually turn out, even though they like you? You have to first you identify those folks who you know absolutely are going to vote for you. And you look at their record of voting. Do they always vote? If they do, frankly, you don't have much work to do there. So you put your resources elsewhere. You then identify people who are sympathetic to you as a candidate, but may not have a consistent voting record. They vote every other year. They only vote in presidential elections, or only voted in 2 of the last 4 presidential elections. And you've got to now focus on those voters and make sure that they actually turn out, because if they do, you will get that vote. Then you just make sure that you have an apparatus in place that can direct people, that can tell them where they vote. You make sure you can get them to the voting places. You have coalitions that work with you.
So when you did this, what did you do? When you did this,
you want state secrets, Andy?
I don't think it's a state, because I remember seeing so many feet on the ground in the local literally on the sidewalks going.
Well, look, to have a good ground game, you've got to have people who are inspiring in the first place, that are going to excite people and want to get them out there working. Look, it's for the most part, when you put together a campaign operation, most of those folks knocking on doors and most of those folks making phone calls are doing it just simply because they believe in you. They're not getting paid. The vast majority majority of them are not getting paid. So the first thing you have to have is a candidate who inspires people to
work for nothing.
To work for nothing.
Yes.
Work for a cause.
Right.
That believes the outcome will benefit them, their community, their children. And then you put those people out there and you just get them knocking on doors. It's a data-driven process. And frankly, one of the things that the other big winner other than the Democrats and Obama was data. If you paid attention for the last month to 2 months, all of the data, the polling data, suggested and pretty decisively that Obama, inconsistently, that Obama would win the vast majority of swing states. The big question was always the popular vote. But the polling in all of the swing states was consistent, and polling, frankly, is a science. It's usually accurate, unless there's some sort of jolt to the system that no one could measure. The fact is, data won. Data said Obama would win by margins of anywhere between 2 to 5 points in each of the swing states. That's exactly what's happened.
Now, I also have a theory, because I've noticed this in the Democrat versus Republican Party. The Democrat Party has got a really young, youthful, and the Republicans seem to be a bunch of old dragons, not appealing to youth. Why?
Okay, for a couple of reasons. And this is, there's a fundamental problem right now that the Republican Party is going to have to sort out.
Right, that's a bigger issue.
It's a major issue. It's going to have to be sorted out on the local level. It's going to have to be sorted out on the state level. It's going to have to be sorted out on the national level. And that conversation is going to start this morning.
What's the conversation then? What is it?
The problem, the conversation is this. How do we attract younger voters, voters of color, and women? Now, look at what happened last night. Romney won, as most Republicans do, a majority, a strong majority, not as large, I don't think as large as McCain, but a strong majority of white men. Well, white men as a proportion of the electorate can precipitously have gone down after election. We are a multicultural society. Young people are also growing up in an age in which they live in communities that are much more diverse. They have friends who are openly gay at younger ages. Society has changed dramatically. The Republican Party is somewhat shackled by a fringe element of their party that has a huge control over the primary process.
I also don't think they've gotten younger.
Well, they haven't gotten young. Well, they could get younger if they would. The fact is, there are some things that the Republican Party needs to come to terms with.
What you have to identify, I think, is where is the Tea Party in this? It seems like in the midterm election 2 years ago, it seemed like the Tea Party was given the benefit of the doubt that they were the reason why so many Republicans across the board won. But the question is how old is that group? What element of the conservative party do they make up? Are they young? Are they middle-aged? Or are they older? That's the question.
I would think they have to be older, right?
Well,
I can't believe they're younger.
Well, and look at young people. Even in my generation, I mean, I think we're in two separate generations, but you know, even in my generation, growing up when I was in high school, openly gay kids in high school, and I graduated in 1995, was not a common thing. In fact,
try the 70s.
Right, it was certainly not in the 70s.
Try the 70s.
But if you ask my younger sister, who's 23 years old, you know, they had gay, lesbian, bi, transgender union clubs in the high school, support networks for kids. Things like gay marriage are non-issues for young people. They don't even understand why anyone would suggest if you love someone, you can't marry them. The Republican Party, there are some pragmatists in the Republican Party who are saying, hey guys, we need to get off this issue. The fact is, the biggest funders for the gay marriage push in New York State were Republicans, wealthy millionaire Republicans who had a son, or who had a daughter, or had a colleague, or had a coworker who was gay. If the Republican Party cannot deal with that issue, they can't get younger voters.
How about also the Hispanic society as far as in general? You could see last night the numbers in certain states.
Florida, you called me about Florida.
About how Obama was able to target, or the Democrats were able to target Hispanic, because you could see starting from Bush how he had 41% of the Hispanic vote, and since then from down to McCain it's gone to like 31, and Romney I think was only able to pull out 27% of the vote.
And
why?
To Bush's credit, George Bush was the last successful Republican who understood the importance of the Latino vote in this country. It's why he did fairly well for Republican with Latino voters. He understood that. That's the reason why he took on comprehensive immigration reform, because he understood where the country is headed demographically. Since that time, though, the Republicans have used immigration as a wedge issue in primaries. So what's happened, and you're seeing it throughout New York and you're seeing it throughout the country. Look at what happened in the United States Senate. You had moderate Republicans who had centrist appeal, who were the parties, the sort of national party's chosen candidates in states like Indiana, states like Missouri. Those are, and we could look at the last election where you had similar circumstances where far-right elements of the Republican Party were able to successfully win a primary election by running on anti-immigration issues, anti-gay issues. Those candidates then take out more centrist Republicans, get on the ballot, and then someone like Claire McCaskill, who should have been defeated, she was the most vulnerable Democrat in the Senate, winds up winning today, I think, by double-digit margins. The Republican Party has to really figure this out quickly. Look at what happened in New York State. So you had 4 Republicans support gay marriage. Right now, one of those Republicans from Dutchess County, Steve Saland, he barely got through a Republican primary. Barely got through, I think it was a dozen or so votes that got him through. He now has lost. He lost because the conservative candidate, the conservative Republicans, stayed on the ballot, siphoned off about 10,000 hardcore conservative votes, and the Democrat is now up by about 1,000 votes. Look at Roy McDonald, Republican, who was defeated in a Republican primary on his gay marriage vote. That's a little bit of a different district. It's more conservative. But nonetheless, the Republicans are eating their own right now.
Well, I'll tell you.
One other thing, though, just going back to that, I heard commentary this morning where they were talking about that Romney, after last time when he ran for president, he tried to stay the rhino, the moderate. This time what he did is, but because he lost that primary, what he did is this time when Perry came out of the gate, what he did is he actually flanked him to become more conservative during the primary.
Correct.
The problem is though, going into the general election, he's cornered. He has nowhere to go because he's already situated himself so tough on the immigration stance in that case that he can't. He loses the Hispanics, so you win the primary, but it hurts you going into the general election.
And not only that, but
wait a second. We're going on your theory here. Explain Greg Ball.
Okay, so Greg Ball, look, Greg Ball.
Now, just for your information, is that this time 100% of the votes are in Dutchess and Putnam. Greg Ball is up almost 7,000 votes.
It's a 4-point spread.
Right, but the last thing I read was Westchester had about 80% of the vote in, and Justin Wagner was up 3,100 votes. So it's not enough.
Yeah.
The
the spread right now as of today is 52-48. It's a similar spread to the Kaplowitz race against Greg Ball. Look, Greg Ball is an interesting politician. He's a bit.
And I will let you have this all your own.
He's a bit of an anomaly. Greg Ball is very good at self-promotion. He's everywhere. You cannot look down a street, at a newspaper, a road sign, a billboard without seeing Greg Ball somewhere.
And also getting back to an earlier point when we were talking about as far as the get out the vote effort, as far as having youth, Greg Ball has got.
He's got a great ground.
Yeah, he does. He has a great ground.
And a very young staff that can put in the hours.
Yeah, well, I would argue that 2 things as to why Greg Ball has been successful, despite what has happened to the rest of his Tea Party compatriots in this election. One, Greg Ball's margins should be bigger. Let's put that out there, though. His margins should be much bigger. He's a incumbent Republican senator. Not only that, but he probably has the most successful self-promotion operation of any politician in the area.
At the same time, he's his own worst enemy.
He is. And so Greg Ball got very lucky in that he did not wind up having a Republican primary, because he would have been forced to remain where I believe he truly is, which is he's a bit of a far-right candidate. He ran that way in his assembly races. He ran that way in his first term for state senate. He was going to be forced to run that way if he had this primary. He got lucky in that his opponent decided to not go forward with a primary campaign for good reason. Greg Ball is a cutthroat politician. Every rule you think exists in traditional campaign politics, he throws out the window. He is willing to engage in some of the most exaggerated, to use a kind word, some of the most exaggerated.
Well, we do have a senior audience, be nice.
He is willing to engage in some of the most exaggerated political gamesmanship to the point where it's just frankly not truthful. And because he's
I
willing
always
to do
felt
that,
it wasn't necessary for this race. What he did for the assembly should not have transferred to the Senate race, and he did not need Wacky Wagner.
no, it was a bit silly, but
That's what I mean. He becomes his own worst enemy.
it's true. I mean, look, his margins were tight, and he was well funded. Spent more money than Wagner had a fraction of the campaign cash available to him that Greg Ball did. Sure. The numbers were tight, but
what
Greg
does
Ball
it tell you about Westchester, where Greg was so up in Putnam and Dutchess and so down on Westchester? What is it telling you about Westchester?
Well, look, Westchester is obviously Westchester's a Democratic county, and despite the success of Astorino countywide, it is a Democratic county. And Greg's district moved further south. It brought in portions of Chappaqua, brought in some more river communities. So I'm not surprised by his loss in Westchester. That's to be expected. Unfortunately, from a Democratic perspective, it just wasn't wide enough to overtake very conservative areas of Putnam County.
Well, that's what probably carried Steve Katz. The only guy I predicted to win that did win, the assemblyman from the 94th district. Now used to be the 99th.
Please, if I ever choose to run for office, please don't suggest I'm going to win.
Seems on the local level I'm a lot more good at this.
Well, you must be going to get good information from other people then.
Well, I just didn't see the demographics of Yorktown and Putnam being in Andrew Falk's favor.
Yeah.
And obviously they certainly weren't, because the District 4 Senate overlaps the 95, that it wasn't in Justin Wagner's favor either.
Right.
You still have a blotch of red there that you guys haven't gotten rid of yet. I know you're trying, you're waiting for them to die.
Yeah.
And then you guys can take
Oh,
over.
look, the Democrats, Bob Costelli lost.
That was, the Channel 12 News spent a lot of time on that because they didn't see that coming.
Yeah, look, I don't think, and I wouldn't be honest if I told you that I thought that I went into this thinking that the Democrats would romp the way they did. I did not. What does that mean, though?
Right, that's what you're here for. What does it mean?
I bet getting back to
The romp locally, or you mean
From top to
from
bottom.
top to bottom. From
Like
top to
you're
bottom.
throwing in Scott Brown from Massachusetts losing.
I'm
Linda McMahon.
Yeah, I mean, look,
Connecticut.
everywhere from the local, state level to the federal level. I would not have thought for a second that the Democrats' successes we saw last night would have been realized. But what does it mean, or what do I see? What I see is that the Democratic Party has fully embraced, and the Republicans have not been able to come to grips with the diversity of the American electorate, and that if a coalition can be formed that has women who are a majority of the voting public, voters of color, and folks who support marriage equality, if you can keep that coalition together, and Latinos, you cannot lose. You cannot lose, unless, of course, look, there are House races across the country that get gerrymandered to be completely Republican or completely Democratic.
What I'm asking is this now. This show goes into Peekskill and Ossining, and both those town governments were blaming Albany for their budget mess, the unfunded mandates. And what do those towns do? They go right around and elect by a huge margin an assembly candidate that is responsible for those. And why do Democrats love to vote against their financial self-interest?
Well,
you can blame an unfunded mandate, but you'll champion the person that put it there.
You can make the same argument, Andy, about why do working class whites in Indiana vote Republican when
I'm talking about specifically Mayor Forster went on television, went in the newspapers. It's Albany's fault, our budget problems. Yet your damn party championed the woman that voted for those things that have screwed up the city you live in.
Well, look. There's responsibility to be laid all over Albany.
But you have a choice to say, okay, you screwed me. Now I'm going to get rid of you.
But let's look at then instead the Senate. Let's look at the Senate. Why is it that Republicans have continued to enjoy a majority in the Senate? They have just as much responsibility for the unfunded mandates. But why are they successful?
Really, it's gone back and forth, and they may lose it again.
No, that's not true. Look, everyone in Albany could have cut a deal. Everyone in Albany could have cut a deal that the tax cap came along with mandatory reductions in unfunded mandates. That was not part of the equation.
Because that would have upset the the people paying their way, which is the special interest. That ain't going to happen.
Okay, so I'd say to you, Albany's unfunded mandates are an equal opportunity
Absolutely.
problem.
I've said it many times. Once you get the Albany, the difference between a Democrat and a Republican is not even worth a pound of spit, because they are just where they are. They go to the highest bidder. The corruption trials, the stuff the feds are uncovering proves this. Corruption in both parties, equal opportunity.
I don't dispute that.
But there's going to be a drain. But even look at it at the county level too. Like Astorino just mentioned 3 weeks ago, he may have to cut back 800 employees. Why? The pension costs are becoming just insurmountable on local governments, river towns, cities, municipalities, as well as county governments. It's happening across the board. Are they listening up there? Not yet.
Look,
but
there are some. Here's the problem with the debate nationally and in New York State and locally about economics and taxes. The problem is no one is willing to. The suggestion that revenue needs to be part of an equation is sacrilege. God forbid you suggest that you need to bring in more revenue. Frankly, you do. God forbid. Listen, for all
so
that
you're telling me in New York, $132 billion is not enough to run a state?
What a state of this size, which has an economy larger than most countries across the world,
because our Medicaid dwarfs California and Texas. Our school outlays dwarf California and Texas, and our results for those outlays are minimal.
Well, here's what I would say to you. There has to be.
Revenue's not the answer. It's getting a better value for your dollar.
There's no one sword that can slice this problem. But what there is you need to come to. There are multiple. You have to put together a recipe to solve the problem, and no good recipe has one ingredient. So you cannot have tax reform. You cannot just cut taxes and suggest that somehow that in and of itself is going to solve all economic problems. You do have to have a revenue equation. If you don't have a revenue equation and all you do is cut taxes, what is the result of that? Job losses at the municipal level, in cities, in counties. Astorino's going through it, the city of Peekskill is going through it. It is equal opportunity.
Okay, yeah, but
now,
wait a second, because I'm going to go with Dominic, who's a very successful businessman, and I'm going to ask him a question. Paying people not to work, is that the recipe for a successful business?
Of course not.
And that is the problem in the municipalities. You have such
government
a
is not
outlay.
A business. Government is not a business.
But like anything else, when you pay more people not to work than to work, then you have a problem. Then you say, "Oh, we need more money to pay what?"
I don't know
people
what
not to work.
I don't know what you mean by pay people not to work.
The parts of their pensions that they don't have, were in the private sector. The private sector has to pick up a certain amount of their pension costs and their health care costs. In the public sector, no. It's all footed by the public, but the public that foots it are the job creators. So who do you raise taxes on? The people that create jobs, and then they leave the state.
The job
Yeah, but we're going away from what we were talking about.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, because we're let's bring it back to the election.
Okay, anyway, so
I'll come on and do an economic show.
So now, need a low, because we are in a new district of Lido and Joe Carvin.
Yep.
The phenomenal disparity in that result was almost 40%.
Oh, it was Joe Carvin barely broke 30%.
What happened?
Look, Nina Lowy is a known entity. She has whether you like her or not, I like her. She has a pretty strong reputation in Washington. She's what's called a cardinal, so she sits on an appropriation committee. She has a lot of influence in terms of how those dollars get doled out. So she's been very successful at taking care of her district. It's an overwhelmingly Democratic district. Nita Lowy has name recognition, and her district is overwhelmingly Democratic. And she's got a good record.
I have to agree with you about being overly Democratic, because you saw that with the Cohen-Latimer race. Latimer voted against the tax cap.
Well,
he voted for the MTA, voted for it, and he walked out of the room so he wouldn't go near the pension vote.
Yeah.
And yet he cleaned Cohen's clock.
Yeah, he did.
Well, you know what you notice too is that we were talking about this one time, how certain districts, they're just culturally, it's been either a Republican since, 1964 or a
beginning of
Democrat.
time, yeah.
And so what happens is it's just a succession from one to the next. Once in a while, you'll get an anomaly where, like for example, look at the congressional district right now between Mulroney and Hayworth.
Yeah.
If you look at that race in the last 3 terms, 4 elections, that thing is flip-flopped now back and forth.
Yeah.
Why? Because the electorate is a more 50-50 rationale within that.
Yeah, and part of that is that district was not shaped through a gerrymandering process. It was shaped by a court. But that's a really important point. And the reason, if I can sort of look at the macro politics of what's happening in sort of the partisan, the real hard partisan divide in this country, is primarily rooted in the House of Representatives, and it's primarily rooted in the fact that the gerrymandering process, the way these seats are carved up in the House, this is why you see a flip in why you can see Democrats elected in red states in the Senate and Republicans elected in blue states in the Senate, because they have to appeal to an entire constituency, a heterogeneous constituency. In the House, these districts get carved up in such a way where you pack in as many voters who are favorable to you as possible. And so naturally, if you are representing those constituents, they are so homogenous and so alike, and there's so little divergence of opinion, that if you're just articulating that in Washington, frankly, you are doing your job in some senses. You're going down there and raising the voice of the people who elected you. And if those people are all conservative and all feel this way, one way or another, and you go down there and you articulate that opinion, in some ways you're doing your job.
Sure,
if you cannot remove, until we figure out how to stop partisan gerrymandering, that's where these cleavages come from. How is it that the Democrats romped in the Senate, the president won almost all of the swing states, yet in the House, I think at most will be a Democratic pickup of 1 or 2 seats. Why is that? Because the districts are designed to be non-competitive. And so long as they're non-competitive, you're never going to get compromised between the leader of the Republicans in the House.
When your party controlled the Congress for 40 years, nobody said we should have non-competitive redistricting. It's only when the Republicans got control of the Congress that non-competitive redistricting became a topic.
Partisans have partisan interests, but I think if you want to sit back and if you can take your partisan hat off, whether you're a Democrat or whether you're a Republican, if you take your hat off and you can say for a second, what are the structural problems that create the division in this country? It's the fact that House districts, it is not frankly, I believe it is not a top-down thing, it is a bottom-up thing. Those districts are so compact and so homogenous that really hard views in those districts do not have to have a conversation with themselves. And it just translates upward. I do not think the elected officials run for election. They basically, for the most part, every now and then they take their cues from their voters. And it's an upward.
All right, bottom line, but because we only have 1 minute left, here's the question. Now that Obama's won, the Senate is Democrat, looks like a stronghold, and Congress is Republican. Will there be compromise across the board, or are we going to be in gridlock for the next 4 years?
Well, the Republicans who did lose in the House were primarily Tea Party Republicans, so there'll be a little bit of room in the Republican caucus towards compromise.
Even John Boehner said so. You're going to see
I don't know. John Boehner is going to speak today, and he has suggested taxes are not on the table.
You watch this. John Boehner's an establishment Republican. You watch. You're going to see the tax package where the top 2% have the tax increase and everybody else doesn't.
Well,
that's what's going to come out.
It would be.
Well, I mean, on other issues too. In other words, are we going to get work done, or is this?
You'll get immigration reform.
Yeah,
you may get immigration reform.
You'll get that, and you will get the tax package too. Anyway, that's what I say. What say you? Mike, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun.
Michael, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
for coming on.
Pleasure.
Anyway, so.
Well, that's another edition of the Volpe Bazzo Report. Our guest today was Mike Morey. Election day, post-election day, 11/7/2012. Couple of surprises. We'll see you next edition.
And starting with the next edition, we start with the local elections for next year. A new cycle begins.
I'm not sure you're going to get I'm actually more fearful that leading